Welcome to a new wave of entrepreneurship. I'm Scott Stewart, founder and CEO of Venture for Canada, and your host. The focus of this podcast is to hear from changemakers and Canadian entrepreneurs to learn about how they've developed their entrepreneurial mindset and skills. In season 3, we'll be chatting with CEOs, founders, and successful business leaders about their career journeys. I'm excited to dive into these conversations about how to foster your entrepreneurial mindset and drive. Val Walker leads the Business Higher Education Roundtable, a nonpartisan, not-for-profit organization that brings together some of Canada's largest companies and leading post-secondary institutions. As CEO, Val drives BHER's strategic direction, member and stakeholder relations, and a high-performing team committed to creating opportunity through collaboration in Canada's skill, talent, and innovation ecosystems. She holds a PhD from McGill University and is an alumna of the Government of Canada's Recruitment of Policy Leaders program. Thanks so much for joining us today, Val. How are you doing this morning?
Hi, Scott. I'm doing great, and it's great to be here. I really appreciate you asking me to come on.
You have a PhD in physiology from McGill University. What advice would you give to someone who is pursuing a PhD but is not necessarily interested in working in academia?
It's a good question, and I think this advice, Scott, is true to anyone working on an advanced degree, whether they think they want to stay in academia or not. And it's twofold. The first part is don't make assumptions. Don't think you know exactly what your future is going to be, because it probably won't be that. And the second part related to that is if someone opens a door for you, then take time and walk through it and see what's on the other side. It doesn't mean you can't go back. It doesn't mean you can't change directions, but explore all of the opportunities and experiences you can before you decide or think you know exactly what you want to be when you grow up.
Out of interest, when you first started your PhD, did you start it with the intent of working in academia?
Yeah, I absolutely did. I loved my time as a researcher. I did a master's degree at Simon Fraser University and then moved to McGill to do my PhD. I studied heart cells. So I worked at a cell level and even at an individual protein and DNA level, which is very different than what I do now. And I think we'll talk a little bit about that. But I would have been very happy as a researcher, I think. But I was always open. I wanted to, no matter what I did, I wanted to give back in some way, whether it was through research or through teaching, which I loved more than anything, or through some other means of public service. And so it was with that bigger lens that I took that led me to explore my options. Not to mention there's about the data out there in Canada tell us that about 1 out of every 5 people that graduate with a graduate degree end up as a tenure track professor. And so that's 20%, right? So anyone who has a single track mind, and these are all supposed to be really smart people, are limiting themselves because a lot of people, as is discussed at some point in the media, don't know what to do if they don't end up with that tenure track job because they haven't considered alternatives. And so why not look around and explore what you like and figure out what you like and what you really don't before you get too far down one road.
Often a lot of young people are given advice, I would say sometimes by society at large, around following one's passion. What are your thoughts on the advice that of follow your passion?
I think that's great advice. Of course you should follow your passion, but I just, again, coming back to what I said before, don't assume you only have one passion at 20 or 15 or at 25 that will continue to be your passion for your whole life. So, one of the things we talk about, and I know we're going to talk about this in a bit, but if you have a chance to get some work experience before you finish school, a very good outcome of that is that you hated it. Maybe you thought you wanted to be a doctor your whole life, and then you get in and have a chance to volunteer and you pass out at the sight of blood. It's really good to know that when you're still in school versus thinking you're going to go on and be a doctor and then realize partway through medical school that's not going to be your path. So for sure, your passions should dictate where you go. If some other thing comes up, it doesn't hurt to try it out too.
Yeah, it's an excellent point, Val. And it's amazing how many people go through all the kind of years of technical kind of education to become a doctor or a lawyer or a nurse. And then they start actually practicing in that kind of career path. And then they realize that it's not for them. I mean, in particular, I know a lot of people who are lawyers like that, that they kind of go in, they never actually shadow anybody of what an actual day-to-day job of what a lawyer is like. And then they actually practicing and they realize that they hate it and that they can't picture themselves kind of doing 35 years of that. And I think a huge, often underappreciated benefit of work integrated learning is that career clarity and the ability that each work integrated learning experience sort of helps you on that path for sort of job seeker, or I guess worker work fit.
Exactly. And for the lawyers out there, it's not all like suits, right? There's a lot of boring paperwork and things. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I agree. I think certain TV shows, Law and Order, Suits, they present a very, that's always in the courtroom and this kind of drama, and it's often very different. But same in the New York Times had a piece last week about a massive nursing shortage and how the amount of people, because of the pandemic, a lot of nurses are just completely burnt out. And I mean, I think my mom was a nurse for the first like 8 years, and then she just quit. She did not like being a kind of nurse. But I think that there's a lot of challenges where if someone isn't able to sort of taste what it's actually like to do a job, it can be challenging to know if that's something you want to spend your entire kind of career working on. So on the topic of work integrated learning and kind of your career path, Val, you participated in the Government of Canada's Recruitment of Policy Leaders program, which for our listeners is a very prestigious program that a lot of the most senior leaders in the Government of Canada on the civil service side have graduated from. So Val, how did your participation in this program influence your career? And in your answer, if you can kind of give a little bit of additional context on what the program structure looks like, that would be great as well.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, the short answer is it completely changed my career trajectory, 180, full stop. So, but to back up, so the original concept of the RPL program was to target Canadian expats who had gone away to school at Oxford or other prestigious places and wanted a way to incentivize them to come back to Canada and join the public service. And it was very successful. The first cohorts were very small, 10 over a couple of years, 15 people, but they were very strong people. And the benefit of the RPL program was that you didn't come in at the very bottom level of the public service and have to work your way all the way up. You had to have an advanced degree, and you had to have policy leader experience. And you can't see me, but I'm putting that in quotes because they let you tell them what policy leadership was to you. And so over time, based on the success of that program, the extension to it was, well, if this is working to get Canadians who have gone abroad to come back, we should also be using it to find Canadians who have stayed in Canada but think they want to be doctors or lawyers or researchers, to see if we can provide an incentive to get them into the government. So it's a pretty crazy interview process. There's like 5 different steps, including role playing to see how you act on your feet. And in my cohort, there was 35 of us, and you come in and you get a chance to interview in several different departments and different branches or divisions within the government to see what that fit is to really help you find your spot within the government. So it was a great program. Because of that program, I realized that I did really like public policy. The secret here in the room is I don't have any training in public policy throughout any of my education. I don't have any formal business training. I don't have a lot of the things that you might think you need on your resume to succeed as the CEO of a not-for-profit. That exposure within the federal public service helped me understand that while data and research and an evidence base for decisions is absolutely critical, it isn't the only thing that matters. Fresh out of my PhD, ready to change the world. My first briefing note was 4 pages long and it had half a page of references. And I thought, I'm collecting primary data just the way I should and put it. And my manager said, no, this is terrible. 2 pages, no references, skip the background lit review, no one cares. Like, what is the point of this? Why are you telling me? And what do you need me to do? And so it really completely helped me, especially in the world I'm in now, figure out how to communicate more effectively and get to the point and take into account other factors that influence decisions beyond the critical foundation, which is data and evidence.
It's interesting. I relate a lot about the kind of briefing notes and kind of the transition from academic writing to, I would say, more decision maker oriented writing. Like, how do you grab the attention of somebody who is really senior in a very brief but compelling way? And I think it's interesting. I found this challenge sometimes even with a lot of recent grads, particularly people who, the more education somebody has, the bigger thing is that transition from like an academic writing style to a more business one is often, I think, something that people have challenges with. So just in terms of your experience, which department did you work in through the program?
I moved around a little bit. I came into Health Canada. And I think in response to being so focused during my PhD work on one protein in the heart, I took the opposite approach and worked in a group that has now become defunct, but it's called Portfolio Affairs. The Minister of Health actually has 5 different organizations for which they're responsible and they need to report on to Parliament. And so we were a little shop that actually worked on and coordinated the files that sat within multiple. So for example, one of the files that I worked on was childhood obesity, and there's a Health Canada component to that. There's a public health component to that. There was research we made sure that there was coordination and alignment between the work going on within the health portfolio so that the minister's feedback and advice was consistent.
On the topic of kind of working within government, I think that often people who've never worked in government, they have an idea of what the government is. And then I think that potentially it's a little bit different than what it's actually like to work in government. And by government, I mean specifically in the sort of non-political kind of civil service. So, well, on that kind of topic, Val, what do you think is one of the biggest misconceptions that people have about what working in government is actually like?
Well, I would say for sure, Scott, the stereotype that government workers check in at 9, they check out at 5, they don't really think, like, they don't have to worry about work in between, is especially for middle level folks and higher, completely false. I know I have friends who are still in the public service and they work some of the longest hours of anyone I know. And it's hard, and they're dedicated, really, really good.
Yeah, both of those I think resonate. I think that it is a false stereotype that civil servants just work like 8:30 to 3, each day and then just peace out. Particularly the more mid and senior level are literally working kind of around the clock and have incredibly demanding jobs that are very complex.
Especially, sorry to cut you off, especially during COVID, it has been unreal. Whether you agree with the policy to provide all of the new programming and new funding to support Canadians during this last 18 months, that aside, the public servants who have actually moved big amounts of money and created new infrastructure for programs is crazy. And that takes hours and hours and hours every day. And I know some of those folks who are now, finally taking some time to recover from basically having no vacation and no break, working 7 days a week for the last year.
On the topic of your participation in the Policy Leaders program, Val, in what ways did the cohort model, so the fact that you participated with 34 other policy leaders, how did that cohort model benefit you? And in what ways do you think cohort-based kind of learning programs can be beneficial from a network building perspective for the participants?
Yeah, the cohort was really important to me. I won't tell you that I'm still friends with the 33 other people because that would not be true, but there are a couple of people that I'm still in touch with. But for all of us to kind of, I'm sure as the folks that go through your program understand it, it's nice to be able to talk to people who are going through the same stuff you are, and to have that shared experience to say, this was a really tough day for me, here's why, and have them say, oh, me too. It makes you feel it's not you, it's learning a new thing, or it's the system, or whatever it is, that shared experience kind of takes a lot of the, you know, angst that I had away, because this was such a new space for me. And the neat thing about the RPL program, a lot of people come in who really did have other careers. And so a lot of us are figuring out how to work within a bureaucracy together, and to share experiences, share what works, share what doesn't, was really useful. More broadly, I would say about the RPL program generally, because there are years and years of cohorts, there's an informal network in the public service that helps you find new job opportunities. And it's, again, a stereotype to say every RPLer is super kick-ass, but generally they're pretty awesome. And so to find out which groups we're hiring, knowing that the director or the director general came through the RPL program, that's a little, it's not a guarantee, but it's a little badge or flag that says there's got to be something good going on with this person because they came in through this program. And so it kind of helped us move in a way that was a little bit less restrictive than if we had come into the federal service without that program.
One thing I find that can sometimes be frustrating in talking to a lot of young Canadians is that they often rule out working for the federal public service. In particular, a lot of very entrepreneurial young Canadians. Entrepreneurial leaders are needed in the entire sector of the Canadian economy. You need them in banking, you need them in technology, you need them in the civil service. And I find a lot of entrepreneurial young Canadians just say, oh, I don't want to work in government. And they don't even kind of consider it. They just think it's kind of going to be a boring job. And one of the things I find, a little frustrating is that for certain kind of people, it's you have a greater ability to create huge, massive impact in government than perhaps literally anything else that you can do. So if you were to talk to, like, let's say an entrepreneurial young person who maybe has an interest in public policy, but is currently saying, you know what, I would never want to work for the government. That's not what I want to do. What would you say to kind of convince them to open their eyes to consider working in the civil service as a potential kind of career option?
I will preface this answer, Scott, with the I worked for the federal public service for 3 years and then decided it was not for me, and then I left. So with that as a caveat, you don't know until you try. That's what I would say. I have worked even since I left the government to try to get them to be more open to doing co-ops or internships for students, but also interchanges. So that's a program where you have a job. So someone who works for Venture for Canada could, if there was a right fit and a mutual interest, go and spend a secondment, say 4 or 6 months in the government to actually, again, experience it for themselves and not make assumptions about what may or may not be true. So that's what I would say. It's one thing to say, well, try it. You don't know until you try. Again, it's the government, so it's not easy just to try it, but we're working to help make it easier. The other thing I would say is it's completely inaccurate to paint the federal public service with a single brush. There are places that entrepreneur type folks would absolutely hate, for sure.
So in your role, Val, you hear tons of different kind of career advice for young people from probably many different corporations, universities, many different people. What is one really common piece of career advice that you hear frequently given to young people that you really disagree with?
So I only had to think about this for 2 seconds, Scott. And I get why people say it, but it's fake it till you make it. I think the idea, especially these days, around being your authentic self, will be willing to be a bit vulnerable, doesn't easily, make sense with that phrase. I get it. You need to maybe sometimes act a bit more confident than you feel on the inside, but I wholeheartedly believe and tell my team, and when I talk to students, just be you, be your authentic self. Don't fake it, because that means that you don't think who you are is good enough for the right fit. And I don't think that's true. And I don't think that's how you should approach whatever point in your career you're at.
Someone once said to me, and that it stuck, is that the difference between a smart person and a dumb person is the ability to say, I don't know. And I think it lies to the root of the fake it till you make it advice. Is I think a lot of people are afraid to say, I don't know the answer to that question, I'll get back to you, or that's not my skill set. It's better to have that humility, and that showing that vulnerability also as a leader, or just as a person, as Brene Brown and many people have written about, is a lot better than just constantly blustering and saying that you're you know everything.
It's easy to say, it's really hard to do. It's really hard to show vulnerability, especially earlier in your career, because I get it. I'm a type A, want to impress all the time. I know that, I'll do that. I can do, like, I get that. So that is a thing that was a journey for me. And some people might say, well, sure, now that you're where you are, it's easier for you to be that person. But, and there's probably some truth to that, if I'm being honest, but I try so hard with the students that I talk to and the people who ask my advice, just let them talk about how to be your genuine self without saying, I don't know every single time you answer a question, right? Because that's not where we're suggesting people go either. But despite being hard, I stand by that. I think it's really, really important to be genuine and authentic.
So kind of looking at your work, and we've talked a little bit about BHER, so which stands for the Business Higher Education Roundtable, which is an organization that you run, Val. Can you describe kind of the genesis of BHER and how it came to be?
For sure. The Business and Higher Education Roundtable, yes, we call it affectionately BHER for short. It was founded by the Business Council of Canada. The Business Council is an advocacy group based in Ottawa for large companies, representing all parts of the country and all sectors of the economy, about 150 of the largest companies. So your listeners might be thinking, okay, so a lot of lobbyists sitting around advocating for big business. That's not the right mental image for you to have. The Business Council does a lot of cool policy research and looks at, the issues that do matter to big business, but those include climate change, those include economic growth, they include skills and talent, innovation. So it was a really awesome place to be because we had some freedom to look at what works and how we can have an impact. Scott, to your point about you can have impact within the public service to influence Canadian policy. You can also have quite a bit of it working for a not-for-profit. And so at the time that I joined, which was 2016, the big 3-year focus for the Business Council was on skills and talent. And during that period of time, they launched a skills survey for their members that continues to this day. We do it every other year to ask directly business leaders, what are your biggest issues when it comes to skills and talent? And there was a whole bunch of stuff we heard and we continue to hear every couple of years. But one of the things that stood out was lack of solid relationships with post-secondary leaders. Would love to work more closely with post-secondaries, whether those are colleges, polytechnics, or universities, but we don't have a mechanism to do it. So if I'm a company based in Toronto, I know who the PSEs are, the post-secondaries are in the GTA. So I'll go talk to George Brown or U of T or who, what have you, even though maybe the best connection for you is actually UBC or Lethbridge. And so it was a real jump for the Business Council to create this entity, the Business Higher Education Roundtable, incubate it, just like a startup being incubated for 3 years to test the concept and basically go back to the business members and say, okay, you said you wanted a mechanism to do cool stuff for the country when it comes to skills and talent. If you had this mechanism, we will provide some space to create that mechanism. Val, you're going to run this thing and let's see, let's test it, right? So now we're in complete startup world. So we were incubated within the Business Council for 3 years. We found members from the business community and leaders from the post-secondary community, brought them together and said, okay, what are your top issues? What are those things that sit at the nexus between educators and employers that you want to tackle together? And that's how we started down the path to work on work integrated learning. And by 2018, it's kind of one of those do or die moments, right? We're not going to continue to incubate you forever. We've funded you for 3 years. You guys need to go out and get your own money or we're going to shut it down. And we went out and in the 2019 federal budget, advocated for and received funding $17 million to run a national program to make sure that every student in Canada that wants some kind of work experience before they finish school to get that experience. And man, so that's where we started. And it's a journey that's certainly continuing, but it really came from a recognized gap that business leaders identified, and the chance that the Business Council took to say, okay, we're gonna create a mechanism to fill that gap and see what we can do.
Going back to that definition of entrepreneurial, to identify and act upon opportunities to create value for others, is I think you're a great example of a entrepreneurial person, and you've, as an entrepreneur, basically taken this little, it was an idea at a time and built it into this large national organization that's supporting tens of thousands of young Canadians to get working or learning experiences across the country, influencing on policy. And I think Val, your career is a great example of that. There's many different paths of entrepreneurship. It's not just about launching a tech company, although that's also important for Canada. But I think careers like what you're doing, Val, are also very entrepreneurial, and it's really important to highlight.
Thank you. That's very nice of you to say, Scott. I think we've joked about this a lot internally about all of the challenges. We have all the same challenges as running a startup, but without venture capitalists wanting to throw millions of dollars at us to get to net positive in terms of revenue flow. But there are a lot of parallels. I mean, our venture capitalists are the governments, right? We make a pitch, we demonstrate the value that we would provide if we had that funding come to us. So it's been neat to talk to some of my friends who are in the startup space to just recognize exactly how many parallels there are.
You interface and interact with many of the leading kind of companies across the country. Dave McKay, the CEO of RBC, very involved, and I think he's still the chair of, right? He's the chair of BHER and is instrumental in building BHER alongside you. And RBC plays a huge role in this game skills conversation nationally as well. From what you're hearing from some of the largest employers in the country, Val, what are the skills that employers need the most? And then also conversely, what are the skills that potentially are lacking the most, in particular amongst kind of recent grads that employers need?
Mm-hmm. It's what we're now calling, and you know this, we call them human skills. Scott, we've talked about human skills a lot. These days we're calling them social and emotional skills. Those skills like resiliency, if really the biggest challenge in your life was a C on that paper, my guess is your ability to withstand challenges and overcome them is maybe not as great as someone who has, as a refugee left a country and had to start a new life in a new country and, work there. Those are the extremes, but you get the point. And employers say that employers would use terms broader than that. So business acumen and soft skills, although we've decided never to say those soft skills because that's a terrible term. Human skills, those things that make people skills, right? So communication, critical thinking, empathy is over the last year and a half probably one of the terms that I've heard the most. And for those of your listeners out there, like, oh, empathy, yeah, that's soft stuff, like that's all touchy-feely. How do you be a good salesman, right? You need to figure out what your customer wants, what they have to spend, you need to empathize with your customer to be a great salesman. So it's really interesting. So it's those skills, the social and emotional skills that the employers recognize they need. When we survey them, like I said, we do this survey, and they say that, the technical skills that recent grads have coming out of either a college or a university are really good, pretty good. It's those skills, it's all that other stuff that they struggle with new hires.
I have loved the term cyborg workers, which I've seen your organization, I think has, which is around the need for workers who have kind of the technical dimension, but also the human and sort of social skill dimension. And I think that's, in the 21st, the century, the workers who are most successful will often need that kind of mixture. They'll need some technical skills, but if they only have technical skills and they have no social emotional skills, it's not going to go very far. Likewise, if you have only social emotional skills and no technical skills, you're also probably going to be held back. In what way do you think the post-secondary system in Canada needs to evolve to better train young people for the jobs that they're going to be working in once they graduate?
The post-secondary system is also not a uniform beast, right? So when we think about that at BHER, we think about what can the college or university administrators do, what can the deans do, what can professors do to be more responsive, and then you have to actually figure out how to get all of those groups of people within the post-secondary system to play nice together, and that's not always easy. I think, you know what, so very quickly, the administration generally gets it. They are the ones that recognize the need to, it doesn't mean suddenly all the curriculum developed are going to be exactly only what Google needs or Facebook. That's never going to be a thing. That shouldn't be a thing. But they recognize that you can have, you know, permeability, which is the term used by Alex Usher several years ago in one of his blogs about talking about the relationships between post-secondaries and industry. It can be permeable, right? There can be movement from one to the other. It doesn't mean that evil industry has come in and taken over everyone's, you know, young kids' brains. It just needs to be in the right balance. The administration folks normally get that. The biggest challenge, if I'm being honest, is at the professor level, and maybe there's a bit of hubris that lacking. Maybe there's a little bit of, this is my course, this is what I teach. I think it's changing though, if I can say to be positive, that certainly the younger professors, there's a lot of profs who are very open to incorporating, you know, maybe you can't have every student in your class go and do a co-op term for 4 months, but there's a lot of profs who are integrating class-based experiences into their students' development, so they get a chance to at least understand how to apply what they're learning to a real world situation, even if they don't leave the classroom and spend 4 months in that real world. So it's happening, I would say slowly, maybe a bit more slowly than industry would like to see at the actual classroom level, but there are ways that the profs can help get students to be a bit more well-rounded when they come out. I think that the last thing I'll say is that the biggest challenge is when there's data to support this, when, you know, en masse post-secondary, they're asked, how well do you think you prepare students to enter the workforce? And like, they think they're awesome at it. And then you ask employers, like, how well do you think the post-secondaries have prepared students to enter the workforce? And it's quite a bit lower. Like, there's that disconnect, which comes back to part of the mandate of BHER, is to try to bring people together, get them talking the same language, as close to on the same page as you can, and then work together to find solutions to some of those mismatches.
So what exactly is work integrated learning, Val? What are the different examples of kind of work integrated learning? And how can work integrated learning create a win-win for both employers as well as students?
Yeah, so we have a really broad definition of work integrated learning, as you do around entrepreneurship. For us, it's giving a student some exposure to a real world issue or challenge, whether that be by spending, you know, structured work is one subset where you are doing a co-op or an internship and you're actually at that place of work, or virtually as it's been in the last little bit. But increasingly, there are also classroom-based types of where, like I said, maybe it's an applied research project and you're working even for a whole term on a project that is actually truly a company's big issue. We need to launch a new marketing campaign. Man, we wish we could innovate a new product that allowed our customers to have this. They're as wide as the challenges that exist for companies. And kind of the really cool, and that includes hackathons. I know you guys do a lot of that. Like those real challenges that give students a problem, gives them in some cases a term, in some cases a few weeks, in some cases a weekend to band together and work to find a solution. One of the areas of work integrated learning that BHER is super interested in right now is called micro-will. So the general thinking out there still is that longer is better. A co-op is a 4-month or 8-month placement in a work setting. Internships can often be 12 or 16 months, and obviously those are better than a hackathon or a shorter term project. And we're actually just launching a research project to identify whether in fact that's true. what we're increasingly talking about is the fact that, you know what, if we all agree that the world of work is changing, then of course will is changing with it. And so what experience, if it's valuable to the student, and by valuable, I mean, if students say, yeah, based on that experience, I feel more confident going into an interview, I have more experience to put on my resume, I created a bigger network, then that's amazing. Can they do that in 2 weeks? I think so. Can they do that? You know, what does micro look like? Can they do that virtually without actually setting foot in the office? I think so, but there's not a lot of data on that. So that's a bit of a long-winded way to say, will can be so many things, and it will continue to evolve, and new types of experiences for students will be added as work continues to.
The biggest piece of advice I'll give to young people when I'm chatting with who might be just starting university or college is do work integrated learning. Like, it will have a huge impact on your career clarity, on your earnings, post-graduation, on finding a meaningful and fulfilling career. It's also extremely beneficial for employers. So it is genuinely a win-win situation. And you look at some of the countries like Germany that have some of the lowest youth employment rates in the world, and it's often because of a very long historic work integrated learning type setups that have worked very well within their context. And it's fantastic to see the growth of work integrated learning opportunities in Canada. I think in the last 5-10 years. I think 10 years ago, probably not that many people even knew about the term work integrated learning. And today it is definitely used a lot more commonly. So one thing we love talking about at Venture for Canada is reading and books. On that vein, Val, what are 3 books that have had a particularly formative impact on your personal development, and why?
Yeah, so I was looking through some of the previous podcasts that you've done with folks to get a sense of the books that they picked. And so I'm not as big a biography reader as some others. So I don't have one inspirational person and it's their book. But one book for me is, I have it here. I'm going to show it. I don't think we're actually on camera, but it's Tools of Titans by Tim Ferriss. And those, you'll notice in all of my book selections, you can basically open to any page, and it's a short form interview. Tim Ferriss does a podcast who I'm sure a lot of your listeners are familiar with, and it gives you, the sections are organized into healthy, wealthy, and wise. And so in the wealthy section, it's a lot of startup owners, folks who are talking about their journey or a particular thing they do to get them up in the morning or whatever. And you can basically turn to any page and read 3 or 4 pages and get some neat insight. And so I find that book fun. At the end of the night, I can just turn to any page and I don't have to, read from start to finish. Another one is Good to Great by Tim Collins. And the same thing, it talks about a whole bunch of case studies of different companies who came to some critical pivot point as to whether they were going to continue to succeed or not. And for me, those individual stories of companies, even though none of them are like my company, you can see the similarities and that critical decision point that was made to try some, whatever. In every example, it's something different, but I found those stories really interesting to relate to, or in some cases not really relate to, depending on the organization. And the third one is not at all, Scott, I think what you are asking about, but I'm going to tell you anyway. It's one of my favorite books. It's The Book of Awesome. And it's by Neil Pasricha. And it is, each page is a different thing to be thankful for. That's something that is super awesome, even if it's something as small as finding, a nickel on the ground or a snowy day to getting a new job. And he's funny. He's a funny writer, and he just helps. This book helps keep me grounded when I've had a tough day.
Those are great recommendations. Thanks so much, Val. It has been a true pleasure chatting with you. It's been great working with you over the last close to 5 years. And congrats on the awesome work that you're doing at the Business Higher Education Roundtable, supporting students and employers across the country. That's it for this week's episode of A New Wave of Entrepreneurship. Stay connected with us via our social and our email list. Subscribe to us in your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss our next episode. If you have feedback on today's episode, tweet us at Venture4Canada. That is Venture, the number 4, Canada, or email us at podcast@venture4, that's spelled FOR, Canada.ca. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. I'm Scott Stewart, and until next time, stay safe, stay motivated, and stay grateful. A New Wave of Entrepreneurship is produced by Juanita Lee Garcia and Latifa Farah. Editing and mixing also done by Latifa Farah. Erica Ormanston is our editorial assistant. Mark Wallach and Premium Beat own the copyright and publishing rights related to the song used in this podcast. The comments and opinions, recommendations, or suggestions expressed on the podcast by the guests are not liable to Venture for Canada and belong solely to each individual. Any information provided stated by our guests and our host is independent of Venture for Canada. A New Wave of Entrepreneurship is a Venture for Canada brand, and all content is owned by Venture for Canada. If you'd like to use our content, please reach out to us at podcast@venture4, that's spelled FOR, Canada.ca.